Okay, so what's going on is I posted this video and I had music playing in the background on my Bluetooth speaker, and I didn't realize that was a copyright issue. So YouTube blocked some of the content. So I'm going to do this voiceover. So hopefully this works out and you understand why my lips are moving and a different cadence to my voice. So right now I'm just setting up a stop block. So when I cut both of my styles, which are the vertical pieces on the face frame, that they are both the exact same length. I'm leaving a little gap I just explained at the bottom. So when I push the next board against it, if there's any sawdust on my table, it'll push underneath that board and it won't keep making my pieces that I cut shorter and shorter because I don't realize that there's dust accumulated in that little pocket. So if you lift it up and you push it and there's sawdust, it just simply goes underneath the board. Here, I'm just explaining that I use 2-inch styles. So when you add them together, I leave them a little proud when I mill them up. So I have right there, I'm explaining I have 4 1/16. So since the total width of the cabinet is going to be 44 inches, and since that's 44 minus 4, I'm sorry, since that's 4, 44 minus 4 is 40. So I'm going to cut my rails, which are the horizontal pieces, at 40. And I'm actually going to probably cut them at 40 1/16, just to make sure that the face frame hangs over on both sides a little bit. So here I am at my face frame table, explaining how we use it to put pocket holes to pull the joints real tight. You won't see the pocket holes. They're going to be behind the face frame. So here I'm walking over to my pocket hole machine just to explain. I'm using just a scrap piece of lumber to explain how it works. So you put it in there. My pocket hole machine is pneumatic, so when I pull that lever, it clamps down, and the drill bit actually raises up from underneath and drills a little pocket hole, which I just showed. So I'm going to walk back to my face frame table and I'm going to put it together, screw it together, of course, putting glue in between all the joints. Anytime you put 2 pieces of wood together, you should use glue. Glue is very, very, very strong once it dries. Oh, I'm explaining right there that those cylinders push down so hard that if you got your finger underneath them, I'm pretty sure it would crush your finger. And what it does is it makes the other side super flush. That way when I'm sanding, it takes a lot of the work out of it. If it's uneven and you have to sand it even, you start running into problems. So it's good to have a face frame table. Before I had the table, I used to do it on a tabletop using a face frame clamp, which essentially does the same thing, but it's just nicer when you can walk up to it and flip a switch and it holds it down for you. Here I'm showing that the bottom of all my cabinets is the same, always the same height. So I made a jig so I don't have to measure every time. And that's going to be the bottom of the cabinet. Now I think I'm explaining that the fixed shelf I have to measure because it could be different. I know in this case it's 35 1/4. I knew that, but I wanted to explain the process. So I measure 35 1/4 from the bottom. So of course when I walk to my face frame, I have to start from the bottom. And if I measure up 35 1/4 on both sides, I should get that middle rail perfectly where it needs to be. I think I'm explaining somewhere in here that after I make a mark, I usually put an X on the line that the piece of lumber is gone. Just so I make sure I don't accidentally put it on the wrong side of my line. Excuse me. Here I'm just showing how I cut spacers to make things perfectly symmetrical. So I just added that other horizontal piece called a rail because they're going to have 2 drawers right there. So I put the piece that's going to separate the two drawers, which is a piece that's 1.5 inches wide. There I measure what I have left over, and then I divide that in two, and I go cut just some scrap wood, and I make sure that it fits. In this case, it took me 3 times. I always cut them a little bit long, because you can always cut a piece of wood, but you can't stretch it. I don't know what I'm saying here. Maybe I'm saying something like measure twice, cut once, or something. So they're both a little bit too long. They won't fit. So I walk back to my miter saw, take a little bit off, and I already know, because I filmed this yesterday, that I didn't take off enough. So I'm gonna go try one more time until I get it fitting in there real snug. This isn't the only way to do it, but it's the most accurate way that I've found. So I like to do it. It takes a little more time, but it's perfect every single time. So there, I got it fitting snug. So I pull them down, put my piece on top of them. Now that it's perfectly symmetrical or perfectly centered in my opening. Sure, I'm saying that to some degree. So once I get that little piece screwed in, I have another style, because there's going to be 2 doors below the 2 drawers. So since my spacers are right, I'm going to use those same 2 spacers, the scraps of wood that I used. I call them spacers. They'll be thrown away once I'm finished with this process, because I probably won't use them again, and because I always have scraps laying around the shop. Oh, right there I'm explaining I use 1.25 inch pocket screws, but I keep 1.5 inch pocket screws. And the reason why is because sometimes they strip out. So if they do strip out, I just go grab one that's 1/4 inch longer. So I pull out the 1.25 inch screw, I put 1.5 inch screw, and that way it'll almost always fix the problem and pull the joint tight. Right here, my brother's just spreading glue, because again, anytime you put 2 pieces of wood together, in this case I'm putting lumber on plywood, we put glue. There, I'm stapling it. I use staples on paint grade projects because they hold better. I also have finished nail guns that I use, but I don't know, I like staples. The staples, if you're wondering, are 1.25 inch long, which is plenty sufficient, especially once the paint dries. Here looks like we're puttying where the staple went in. On the top of the cabinet, I use a 3-inch piece most of the time, just to make sure I have plenty up there to grab any crown moldings that are going to be put on later. So there's the cabinet with the face frame put on. It's sticking over on both sides by like maybe a 1/16 or so. So I'm going to show how I use a router with a flush trim bit. I think there I'm just explaining that I double checked all my measurements with the drawing that the client or customer provided me, just to make sure I'm building what they specified. So here's my router with my flush trim bit. It's got a little V on it, which I'm going to explain in a minute. That little V goes right between where the face frame meets the cabinet. The cabinet is made of plywood. The face frame is made of lumber. So the V, what it does is when wood, any kind of moisture, any kind of difference in pressure or air temperature or air moisture, I meant to say, wood expands and contracts. So In the old days when I used to build cabinets years ago, we used to sand that flush. We wouldn't put the little V in it. There I'm showing what the little V looks like when I'm done. The whole point of that is so that when the wood expands and contracts, the paint won't crack right there, because the lumber is going to expand and contract at a much higher rate than the plywood, because the plywood is a bunch of layers of lumber glued together. So I'm just explaining that. And then I think I'm going to show running the router. Yeah, I'm just explaining everything I just told you guys. Okay, so there I am. I'm running it. So it's flushing it up. It's cutting off that excess because I let it stick over a little. And it's also putting that V all at the same time. So I'm going to do both sides like that. And I only have one more thing left to do. At the very bottom, I have to add 2 little blocks of wood. I think it'll explain what, yeah, I'm explaining right there. And the reason why is so when somebody's like mopping or sweeping, dust doesn't get trapped behind the face frame. So I put a little block of wood so nothing can get back there. And there's the little blocks of wood. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, leave a comment asking the question and I'll do my very best to answer it. I don't know what is going on with my phone right here. I don't know why it's doing that. I'll go ahead and try to stop it right here if I can.